In 1998, a lawyer in West Virginia named Rob Bilott received a box in the mail. Inside, hundreds of VHS tapes, sent by a desperate farmer named Earl Tennant. Earl had lost 153 cows, one by one, over several years. Black teeth, tumors, white foam coming from their mouths. He had called the government. They told him nothing was wrong. He had called veterinarians. They told him nothing was wrong. He had filmed everything himself. Every dead cow, every discolored patch of water, every pipe draining from the landfill next door. And on the side of that pipe, stamped clearly in metal, were 4 words: E.I. DuPont de Nemours. Rob Bilott was not an environmental lawyer. He had spent his career defending chemical companies, but he watched those tapes, and he could not look away. What he discovered over the next 15 years would become one of the largest environmental lawsuits in American history. It would reveal that one of the most trusted companies in the world had secretly poisoned the water supply of an entire nation. And not just America, the entire planet. Friends, to understand what DuPont did, you first need to understand what they created. In 1938, a 27-year-old chemist named Roy Plunkett was working at DuPont's laboratory in New Jersey. He was trying to develop a safer gas for refrigerators. One morning, he opened a cylinder of experimental gas, and nothing came out. The cylinder still weighed the same. The gas had not leaked. Plunkett took a saw and cut the cylinder open. Inside was a white, slippery powder. The gas had transformed itself into something that had never existed before. He tested it with every acid, every solvent, every chemical in the laboratory. Nothing affected it. Nothing dissolved it. Nothing reacted with it. It was, for all practical purposes, indestructible. DuPont named it Teflon, and for the next decade, it was one of the most celebrated scientific discoveries in history. The US military used it in the Manhattan Project. It was used in airplane engines, weapons plants, and eventually, non-stick pans. By the late 1990s, Teflon was generating $1 billion per year for DuPont. It was in nearly every home in America, and nobody knew what was in the water. Here is what DuPont knew and did not tell anyone. To manufacture Teflon at scale, they needed a processing chemical, a helper molecule that allowed them to apply Teflon as a coating. That chemical was called C8, also known as PFOA. In 1961, the same year Teflon pans hit the American market, DuPont's own scientists tested C8 on rats. The results were alarming. Even small doses caused the liver to grow abnormally. Larger doses were lethal. The chemical looked like a fatty acid to the human body, so instead of being flushed out, it was absorbed into the bloodstream. It traveled to the liver, the kidneys, the thyroid, and because of its chemical structure, long chains of carbon and fluorine bonds, the strongest single bond in chemistry, the human body had no way to break it down. It accumulated, slowly, year after year. In 1962, DuPont confirmed the findings. In 1965, they found the same toxic effects in dogs. By the early 1980s, their own studies confirmed that C8 caused testicular cancer in rats. None of these studies were shared with the scientific community. None of them were shared with regulators. And all the while, DuPont was dumping almost 10 tons of C8 into the Ohio River every single year. This is the moment in the story where most people expect the company to have been ignorant, to have made mistakes without knowing the consequences. But here is the document that Rob Bilott found buried in those 60,000 pages DuPont sent him. In 1984, DuPont officials held a meeting. The purpose? To decide whether C8 should be replaced with a safer alternative. Their conclusion, in writing, was this: currently, none of the options developed are economically attractive. They knew, they met, they calculated the cost of switching, and they decided that switching was too expensive. So they did something else instead. They calculated their own safe dose for C8 in drinking water. DuPont scientists, not independent researchers, not government regulators, determined that 1 part per billion would be the acceptable limit. Then they tested the water leaching from their landfill into Earl Tennant's Creek. It came back at 1,600 parts per billion. They did not tell Earl. They did not tell the government. They did not tell the 70,000 people drinking water from wells around their factory. They told nobody. Rob Bilott sent a 900-page letter to the EPA, the Department of Justice, and the U.S. Attorney General. DuPont settled with Earl Tennant privately. Undisclosed amount. no admission of wrongdoing. But Rob was not finished. He sued DuPont again, this time on behalf of 70,000 residents of Parkersburg, West Virginia, people who had been drinking C8 contaminated water for decades without knowing. And in 2005, he pushed for a medical study of everyone in the region. 7 years of data collection, blood samples, medical records. The results, published in 2013, confirmed a probable link between C8 and 6 human diseases: thyroid disease, testicular cancer, kidney cancer, ulcerative colitis, high cholesterol, pregnancy-induced hypertension. A person with more than 30 parts per billion of C8 in their blood had roughly double the normal odds of developing kidney cancer. DuPont paid $600 million to victims and maintained throughout that they had done nothing wrong. Friends, here is the twist that most people do not know. When the pressure finally forced DuPont to phase out C8, they did not stop using the chemistry. They spun off their entire Teflon business into a new company called Chemours. And Chemours simply took C8, removed 2 carbon atoms, and started manufacturing C6. They called it Gen X. They claimed it was safer, more degradable, less persistent. Then the cancer studies came back. Gen X caused the same 3 tumors in rats that C8 had caused: liver, testicular, pancreatic. And because it was shorter, it was actually more mobile in the environment, able to travel further, contaminate wider areas. The scientists who had spent decades fighting C8 had a name for what was happening: whack-a-mole. Because C8 and Gen X are not 2 chemicals with a problem, they are 2 members of a family of over 14,000 different man-made chemicals, all of them sharing the same carbon-fluorine bonds, all of them extraordinarily stable, all of them resistant to breaking down in the environment. They have a name: PFAS, per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. You may know them by another name: forever chemicals. They are in waterproof clothing, in fast food wrappers, in microwave popcorn bags, in stain-resistant carpets, in firefighting foam used at military bases and airports across the world. And because they do not break down, they have entered the global water cycle. When it rains on the Tibetan Plateau, one of the most remote places on Earth, that rain contains PFAS. In the year 2000, researchers tested blood samples from thousands of Americans across the country. 100% of those samples came back positive for C8. 100%. Not people who lived near DuPont factories, not people in West Virginia. Random Americans. Everywhere. You have PFAS in your blood right now. So do I. So does every person reading this sentence. Now, here is what I want you to understand about why this matters beyond the science. DuPont is not a small rogue company. They are one of the most respected chemical manufacturers in American history. They have been a trusted partner of the US government since World War II. And for 50 years, they had internal documents proving their chemicals were accumulating in human blood, causing cancer in animals, contaminating water supplies at levels they themselves had calculated were unsafe. They had those documents. They held meetings about those documents. They made financial calculations based on those documents, and they said nothing. The first legal limits for PFAS in American drinking water were set in April 2024, 86 years after Plunkett discovered Teflon. The safe limit for PFOA was set at 4 parts per trillion, 250 times stricter than the limit DuPont had privately calculated in 1984 and already knew its own factory was violating. Earl Tennant died before the study that vindicated him was published. His wife Sandra died too. Rob Bilott spent 20 years of his career on this case. He was threatened, he was pressured to drop it. The law firm that employed him, which had historically represented chemical companies, struggled with what he was doing. He did not stop. In 2023, 3M, the company that first manufactured C8 and sold it to DuPont, agreed to pay up to $10.3 billion to settle PFAS contamination claims from public water systems across the United States. It is the largest environmental settlement in history, and the water is still contaminated. The chemicals are still in your blood, and most of the 14,000 members of the PFAS family have never been studied for their health effects. We are, as one researcher put it, only starting to understand the problem. The same problem that DuPont understood in 1961 and chose not to tell us about. Tell me in the comments, did you know about PFAS before this video? And if this story disturbed you, it should, I have made a full video on the Teflon nonstick pan specifically. What is actually safe, what is not, and what the science currently says about your kitchen. You can click here to watch it. Thank you very much.